Hi, my name's Casey. I'm 17. I can just look at a person and see if he's lying or just worried. I can see if he'd slept well last night and what he's thinking of at the moment. You may think I'm nuts. Well, maybe. But in fact, things are much more interesting. You want to know where I got such a superpower from? Then make sure you watch this video to the end. To start with, my dad is a police investigator. Since I was a kid, I thought of him as a superhero who fought against all the bad guys from our city. He easily tracked down criminals and solved even the most complicated cases. I always wanted to know more about his work, so I loved watching detective cartoons and series. I loved how the main characters figured out the criminals using their methods. I always admired how the experienced detectives, like Sherlock Holmes, could tell everything about a person just by looking at the coffee stain on his shirt. I was getting older, but I never lost my interest in detective stories and forensics. I tried to be more observant in my life. I started paying more attention to my classmates' behavior, to their appearance, to the smallest details. Needless to say, I already knew in advance I would enter the police academy after school. But all these series, like Elementary, are nothing compared to real life. I was incredibly lucky once. I was 14 when my dad took me to his work. Well, I didn't visit the bloody crime scene, but I was able to attend a real interrogation. I stood behind the glass, like in the movies. My dad was there in the interrogation room. The suspect was sitting in front of him. There was also a female psychologist there who was carefully watching the suspect's every move and look. There were also some of my dad's colleagues with me behind the glass. My dad asked the man different questions. He answered them, but he behaved very aggressively and impudently. When the interrogation was over and my dad and the psychologist came in the room behind the glass, the first thing the psychologist said was the suspect was lying. And then she expertly explained why, slicing and dicing all the information. There were some things in his body language that gave him away. I carefully listened to her, and it seemed to me that it was real magic, reading a person like an open book just by facial expressions and gestures. After the interrogation, we all went to have lunch. I went up to the woman and asked her if it was possible to learn reading people on your own, or could I only study this at the police academy? She was very friendly. She told me a lot of interesting things, and even suggested some books that would be quite useful. I asked my parents for these books as a Christmas gift. As you can imagine, my life split into before and after when I mastered the information that was written there. First, I changed my mind about becoming a police officer and decided to become a criminal psychologist. Second, I became 100 times more observant and attentive. I even felt sorry for my classmates because they were my test subjects, so to speak. I watched them at school. I watched how they responded in class, how they behaved during recess when they talked to each other. And, over time, I started noticing some very interesting details. For example, my classmate John always scratched his left ear when he answered in class. It was a gesture he used to calm himself down when he was nervous. And he had the same gesture when he was talking to Cynthia, our classmate. I concluded he was also worried when he talked to her. That meant he liked her. Later on, I overheard a conversation between Cynthia and her friend in the school cafeteria. They were discussing John. Cynthia admitted she had been in love with him for a year. At first, I didn't know what to do with this information. Then I decided to help them. On Valentine's Day, I wrote them letters on behalf of each other with an invitation to a date. And how joyful I was when I found out the next day that they had finally started dating. My other classmate, Emily, was always startled by some sharp noises, even if it was just a recess bell. One day, one of the guys was walking past her, throwing a backpack over his shoulder. No one paid attention, but I noticed Emily automatically raised her hand in a defensive gesture. I thought it was suspicious, so I watched her more closely. At school, she always wore jeans, shirts, and long-sleeved jumpers. I've never seen her wear a skirt or a dress or a t-shirt. She rarely socialized with anyone. She even ate at a separate table. Once, when we were in the girls' locker room for a PE class, I purposely sat down to change next to Emily. I already had some suspicions. I wasn't wrong. She had huge bruises on her arms and legs. It was awkward and tactless to talk to her about it. After all, we weren't friends. But I didn't just want to leave my classmate in trouble. I sent an anonymous letter to our school psychologist, asking her to check the situation in Emily's family. As it turned out later, I did a good thing again. Social services found out that Emily's dad was a drunkard. He was always beating both her and her mom when he got drunk, but they were both afraid to tell anyone about it. So they endured this and suffered in silence. The police arrested Emily's dad for domestic violence and abuse. Emily's mom filed for divorce, and Emily started looking happier and more cheerful. She even started talking with some of the girls. It was very funny to observe the teachers, too. For example, I caught some young teachers on the fact they themselves don't know the content very well many times. They were given away by their hands, the constant scratching of their noses and glancing away. I wouldn't be surprised if the history teacher even made up some facts on the spot while he was teaching us. Well, no one checked the facts afterwards. Why in the world would some students do that? There are a lot more interesting things to do. Anyway, the more I immersed myself in body language, the more interesting and entertaining the people around me became. For example, I noticed that my dad never lies. The only emotion he's been hiding from Mom and me was fatigue. But that was only to make us worry less. Mom has more hidden emotions. Every morning when she walks Dad to work, she smiles and wishes him a great day. But then I can see how worried and afraid she is. Still, my dad's work is very dangerous. You never know what's going to happen while my dad performs his duties. In addition, sometimes Mom hides her irritation when she talks to her friends. They've been friends since they were kids, and they communicate very well. Apparently, my mom doesn't always agree with someone else's point of view. So, during a phone conversation, she often rolls her eyes and purses her lips. Apparently, she's restraining herself from blurting out too much. Of course, I couldn't always hide my knowledge and skills. So, my best friends found out about it. Then the whole school. Not that I was upset by this, but I noticed people started being more careful in their gestures. However, some things still betrayed them, like their eyebrows, short grins, touching their hair, and so on. Some of them were very skeptical about the very idea that their body language and appearance could tell something about them, but I quickly shut them up in a couple of minutes, telling them the obvious things they didn't even know about themselves. And you know, I always dreamed one day I would be able to tell everything about people in a couple of minutes, like Sherlock Holmes from the famous series did. I was his greatest fan and loved watching every episode. When I was about to graduate from high school, it was time for me to decide which college I would attend. My parents said they would support any decision I made, so the choice was mine. I still hesitated between the police academy and the college where they offered psychology. In the end, I decided I would find a compromise. I would study as a psychologist, and then get a qualification in criminal psychology, combining the two things I loved most in my life. Before the first day of college, I was sure I would get into an environment of like-minded people. I was sure psychology wasn't for everyone. It was a science for special people like me, who were ready to dig into the human soul, roughly speaking, when someone needed their help. I hoped there would be some people among my college mates who would be passionate like me about learning body language, because this topic could be studied endlessly and experience exchange was very important. But how disappointed I was when I realized that most of the students were there by accident. Someone didn't get a high enough score to enter another department. Someone was there because their parents wanted them to, saying this was a very profitable profession. Someone chose a psychology department because it was easier to get into, and so on. Anyway, there were definitely no students having the same burning eyes like me. And then I decided they'd become my next experimental subjects for my observations. I didn't know them at all, and this game was getting more interesting for me. I didn't tell them what I was into. First, because I didn't want them to be clamped down and somehow control themselves. Second, some of the guys could treat my abilities quite critically. It was no good to declare yourself a smartass in a group of future psychologists. I understood everyone would only hate me for that. But one night, we were having a student party, and I almost gave myself away. Everyone was having fun, drinking, and relaxing to the fullest. Of course, there were a lot of comical and funny situations, but that evening, we witnessed quite a dramatic melodrama. We had a couple in our group, Ashley and Jay, and they started dating in high school. Then they entered the same department, and they were sure they would live a long and happy life together. But the more I watched Jay from the sidelines, the more it seemed to me he was definitely cheating on Ashley. Apparently, the girl agreed with me because right at the party, she drank too much and decided to arrange a showdown with her boyfriend. They argued for a long time, shouting, insulting each other, not paying attention to the crowd of people around them. Ashley accused Jay of cheating on her, but he proved the opposite. And then I suddenly decided to surprise everyone and went up to this sweet couple. And I laid out everything I'd learned in the first 2 months at college, just observing. Jay cheated on Ashley with her friend Miley, who also studied with us. How did I know that? It's simple. I often noticed when the three of them talked together, Jay leaned more in Miley's direction. He turned his knees in her direction, and he could even put his hand on the chair where Miley was sitting. And these intrusions into her personal space didn't bother her at all. In addition, I noticed several times they almost simultaneously disappeared during breaks. After, Jay always checked his collar when he entered the classroom for a foreign smell. If he hadn't been hiding anything from Ashley, this wouldn't have happened. When the girls needed something at the same time, for example, when they opened the door when leaving a cafe, or they needed some help putting on a jacket, Jay always intuitively wanted to help Miley first, but then pulled himself back and went to Ashley. Of course, I didn't tell them all these details, but I confirmed my words with a couple of observations that were kind of a bluff. I didn't have 100% proof, but Jay and Miley confessed everything themselves later. Ashley slapped Jay in the face and left the party crying. The morning after the party, I thought I shouldn't have interfered. After all, it was their own business. But I always stood for the truth, and I felt sorry for Ashley. She definitely deserved a better boyfriend. Later, I noticed some of the guys looked at me strangely at college. I knew probably it had something to do with yesterday's events, but what did it have to do with me? I didn't cheat on my boyfriend, and I always told the truth. But between classes, I did find out about my popularity. It turned out more people were concerned about the question how I knew everything, and how I was able to determine who Jay was cheating on Ashley with. No one in college had ever seen them together, and I was so sure of my words. A friend of mine even told me some people thought I had some extra psychic abilities, and they planned to contact me with their own requests. This news amused me very much. I even decided I wouldn't refute it, and I would see how the situation would develop. And then some girls started to approach me. They asked me to check if their boyfriends cheated on them. They said they would pay any amount I wanted to find out the truth. Then I thought, such requests would only be good practice for me. Plus, I would start getting money for that. Was I ashamed of getting money for my skills while I was still a student? Absolutely not. After all, I spent a lot of my time reading books, studying this topic, then observing, studying, comparing. The results were different. Some guys cheated on their girls right under their noses. Others did it hiding their tracks very well. Luckily, there were some guys who were very loyal and passionate with their girls, and I proved their loyalty. Besides, I wanted to maintain my reputation as a witch and psychic medium that I already earned. So, I arranged several mass performances, so to speak, where I exposed the deceivers, including one teacher. I brought people together who had been in love with each other for a long time, but they both hid it. I conciliated the enemies who always quarreled over some misunderstandings, and so on. Anyway, I did good things, and I got a good income for that. At the same time, I leveled up my skills. Once, I asked my dad to take me to an interrogation again, but this time, I wasn't just a spectator. I was carefully observing the criminal and watched his every move and gesture. I'm sure when I graduate from college, I'll easily find a job, because my skills are developing day by day. Now I can read any person like an open book. But sometimes, some information seems to me even superfluous. Tell me, have you ever observed facial expressions and the gestures of a person during a conversation? I strongly recommend you do so. You're going to discover a lot of new and interesting things about the people you seem to know very well. Write your observations in the comments below. I promise I will definitely read them. If you liked my story, don't forget to click thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to always stay tuned. There are many videos waiting for you. Bye, everyone.